the screen. It works. Yeah, exactly.
All right, we are getting started now. So thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Jennifer Gates, and I am the planning manager at the city of Encinitas. And again, thank you all for coming. This is a good turnout, I think, for tonight. And so with that, I think everybody knows our current regulations are to wear masks, so we really appreciate that. Also to let you know, just a little housekeeping, there is a restroom right here, but there's also restrooms in the hallway. There's some candy if you want to drop your mask and put a piece of candy in real quick. And some water if you need that tonight. So we're going to start here in just 1 second. I'm going to ask Diego here to do a quick announcement in Spanish.
Buenas noches. Si alguien desea traducción en español, tenemos aquí una mesa atrás con material en español y gente que habla español. Aquí la mesa de atrás para quienes necesiten traducción en español.
Thank you. All right. So again, tonight we're going to talk about the El Camino Real specific plan project. This is the kickoff. I'm going to give kind of the introduction. So tonight the specific plan is looking at opportunities, constraints, and visioning. That's what our focus is for tonight. You have participated in the past years ago in different discussions around El Camino Real, some of you. Also, some of you participated in a survey. We'll talk about that here in a second. But here tonight, we're starting to look at it with different eyes, the different consultant group, and your thoughts and feelings and your ideas on opportunities and constraints of, and the vision for that area may not have changed, but we want to hear from you again. I started in June of 2019, but I have looked at a lot of past documents. We've shared that with our consultants tonight. I'm going to introduce our team here in just a second. On your agenda and the fact sheet, you can see a closer version of our project area. And you'll see it extends basically from the north, Lucadia area, where the Walmart Shopping Center is, down to the south, Sprouts, LA Fitness, basically that whole commercial corridor down to Encinitas Boulevard. So the workshop team for the city that's here tonight, so we have Roy in the back, our Director of Development Services, myself, Jennifer again. We have Christian Gutierrez, who's our Housing Services Manager. He's also in the back. Melinda Dacey is our new planner in long-range planning. If you haven't met her yet, she's been here almost 2 months. And then Kevin Parker, he is in current planning, and he's back in that corner there. And then we have Abe, our traffic engineer. I think many of you know him. He's back there. Pat Pyatt, he's with our city manager's office, and he's a management analyst that works in economic development. And then Melissa Vasquez as an intern that's joining us tonight as well. So for the workshop team, we also sent out an RFP and have a contract with Rick Planning and Design. And so our lead is Brooke, and she's going to introduce her team.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here tonight. With me, I have Mimi Morisaki, who's my deputy project manager. She's over here. I have Britt Plumberg, who is our planner and economist, and then Shannon Bayer, who is one of our key planners. She's at the very back, welcoming people. So with that, and then we have Diego, who you somewhat met, but he's with City Thinkers, and he's a key part of our team as well.
All right, thank you. So the agenda for tonight is we are going to do this overview presentation, and then we're going to open it to an open house. And we'll give more direction on that open house after the beginning half of this presentation. And then we will do a Q&A at the end to answer any remaining questions that you all have. So we will all have a city staff as well as the consultants at each one of these setups that you'll see see around the room. So just for a little project background and purpose. So we did do a housing element update for 2013 to 2021, and then again we did it, just started 2021 to 2029, and it identified the goals and programs to diversify housing in Encinitas. There's been a lot of comments about looking at main corridors to provide housing in a kind of mixed use setting potentially. And that led us to apply for a grant. It's called the Local Early Action Planning Grant from HCD. And that is focused on the objective design standards potentially for El Camino Real and the development of a specific plan. So tonight, also part of that is community surveys. So before we actually started this project with Rick Engineering, we did send out one community survey. How many of you all participated in that survey? Okay, great. So that survey, we really appreciate you participating. We had over 500 responses. So that's really great. That was the second largest response rate we've had this year on our surveys. So it was a really great turnout. There was a question about where that is. So I do have a collection of all those survey responses, so we'll post them on the webpage with additional information from tonight's meeting. They're also tonight's, everything that you're doing tonight, if you have friends, family, or no others that aren't able to participate, that all this information is going to be available online and they'll be able to participate in that way as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, but just so you all know, it'll be through December 13th. Also, just wanted another housekeeping item. How many of you are actually signed up to receive updates on this project? Okay, so we do updates through Constant Contact to provide you information. It'll have a link to the information from tonight that's going to be provided on the webpage. We are recording the PowerPoint in my voice and then Brooke's voice, and that will also be up so individuals can watch this presentation starting later this week. All right. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Brooke, and she's going to talk a little bit more about the process and where we are.
Good evening again. Everyone hear me? I can't really hear myself, so everyone hear me well? Okay, super. So I just wanted to orient you to kind of where we are, where we started, where we're at now, and then where we're going. So we kicked the project off with the city. We joined the city's team in the summer. And then since then, we've really just been doing a deep dive into the research of the existing documents and plans and regulations of the city, as well as doing deep dive into just kind of the physical characteristics, so a lot of site visits, and really just getting to know your city, know the corridor. And then we put together, we are working on putting together a memo that outlines that work, and really it's the detail of that opportunities constraints analysis, which is what I'll call it, that we're going to share with you tonight on the boards in our discussion. From there, actually I should say the other key purpose in tonight is to hear from you as to the vision that you would like to see for the corridor specifically. So that we have a visioning station where we want to hear your input, and from that, and just from the discussion in general, we'll be putting together a draft vision statement. So that'll be kind of the next step. Along with that, I should say just after that, we'll be meeting with a collection of developers and investors and just those that have kind of involvement in the financial side of doing development. And then really from there, from the input, from the existing conditions analysis, we'll be starting to put together a series of land use alternatives. I'll describe in a bit what I mean by that. We will come back to you with those alternatives, which is kind of a whole set of different ideas for what could be seen in the corridor. We will come back to you and share those with you, hear your input on that. From there, we will then select kind of a compilation of your input and the input on those alternatives to select a preferred land use plan. That will then lead to kind of the broader document that we call a specific plan, which is more than just the land use plan. but it has all the other components that we'll kind of talk about tonight: urban design, mobility, etc. Once we have that specific plan drafted, we will come back to you again for your input. I'll take questions at the end if that's okay.
No, I just have a question.
Yes.
I don't see that the public can go to the developer roundtable. Are they invited?
Yes, the developer roundtable will be a publicly noticed meeting, and you'll be certainly invited to that, and the information for that will be up on the webpage, yes. Yep. So once we have the draft specific plan, we will again come back to you for input on everything contained within that draft. And then from there, that input will make any refinements needed, and then along with that, we'll be preparing an environmental impact report. And then in the spring of 2023, we will bring those documents forward, and then hopefully in the summer of that year, take it to your planning commission, your city council, and you for approval. So just to do a deeper dive into where we've been, as I mentioned, we did an opportunities constraints analysis. So what we mean by opportunities are those characteristics, whether that be a regulation or a physical characteristic along the corridor that kind of facilitates and encourages use and development. Examples would be leveraging places that we can leverage to enhance the trail network, places that we could potentially incorporate horizontal mixed use, places that have an opportunity to add some better open space, and then another potential opportunity would be places along the corridor, within the corridor, where we could see some new businesses start up. By constraints, we mean, yep.
Possible that maybe dim the lights a little or something so we can see a little bit
Sorry if it's hard to see. Yes, we can definitely do that.
Is this also available on handout?
It'll be online.
So the memo itself will be on the webpage later next week. We do have a deeper dive into really a lot of this detail contained in the boards, and we'll be able to talk about them much further when we break out into the different stations. So we will you'll definitely have an opportunity to talk about the further detail. By constraints, we just mean those conditions, again, whether it be a regulation or a physical condition along the corridor that kind of inhibits or prevents or makes certain kind of use or development more difficult. So I just want to walk through. We looked at across a number of components, which really are represented with each of the stations you'll see tonight. We did kind of an analysis, opportunities and constraints analysis across land use, across mobility, urban design, and market trends, market analysis. So the first one again that we looked at, sorry, my mouse makes it difficult as I talk, it comes down. So the first one we looked at is land use. And that really is a study. Land use is sort of the term that we give to the different types of development, whether that be residential, commercial, industrial, public spaces, or open space. And it is just really the way of regulating how that particular property can be used, how it can be developed or not developed. There's multiple characteristics, like I mentioned, whether it be open space, residential, commercial, that we are going to be looking at. These different uses collectively go together to shape how the built environment looks and feels and how you use it. And then one of the primary purposes in regulating the land use or applying these different land uses is to really ensure your community's health, your safety, your welfare, your quality of life. So some of the key findings that we found, and again I want to emphasize that the purpose in tonight is also to get your feedback on what you see as the opportunities and constraints. So these are the initial findings that the team found based on either site visits or existing plans and documents. So we want to certainly, your input is the key piece to finishing this consideration, this thought process that we've been through. So the key findings I'm sharing with you are just what we have found, but again, we want to hear from you as well. So our key findings that some of the commercial uses, there's just a real heavy dependence upon cars to be able to use, visit each of the commercial uses along the corridor. There's a very small amount, limited housing throughout the corridor. There's limited use of recreation or access opportunities for recreation through the corridor. And then there's some retail spaces, there's a heavy use of your retail spaces, but then there are some areas, some types of uses that appear to be underutilized, and some of the parking lots particularly could provide opportunity for additional uses, additional development. So another component that we looked at is urban design. And what we mean by urban design, it's really those elements or those characteristics that give a place the way that it looks and feels and the atmosphere that you feel when you're in a space. So it's really kind of a blending of the architecture and what the buildings look like and how they're situated, together with the landscape and then the different uses, whether it be residential, commercial, and how those interrelate with each other. Urban design really can be used, as I mentioned, if you take those up, if you consider the elements that I've mentioned and how they work together, they can work together in a really unique way. So tailoring urban design and being very intentional about the different urban design components can really facilitate a unique sense of place in your community. So again, some of the things that we consider are the different block sizes, if they're big, little, how easy it is to get around. How you get around, do you get around only by driving a car? Are you able to walk or bike? Is it hard to do that? How comfortable or enjoyable is it to walk or bike or drive a car? And then how many opportunities are there for what we call social interaction and using the space in a way that really facilitates interaction between people? So some of the key findings we found were just that a lot of the shopping centers, particularly the larger block shopping centers, are very internally focused, and so it makes it hard they're kind of isolated and makes interaction and linkages difficult. There's a real eclectic mix of architectural styles. There's a bit of a lack of sense of place, as there's not a lot of opportunity for that interaction. It's, as I mentioned earlier, rather car dependent, and so we spend most of our time in the cars to get from place to place, rather than fostering more of a people-to-people interaction. A lot of the buildings are set off the street or separated from the street by whether it be kind of the back of the building or landscape, so it doesn't necessarily draw you into that space. And then there's a real variation in how the buildings are located on a particular site. We looked at mobility. Mobility is really how you get around, and whether that's facilities for the car, facilities for a pedestrian, facilities for a bike, or whether you take transit. And it's really just, it's a term given to how you move around. So we looked at a number of key considerations to that. What are your congestion levels and the numbers of cars coming and going and how quickly they can move through? What kind of facilities are available if you didn't necessarily want to take a car? What facilities are available to have a safe pedestrian or a safe bicycle experience? What are the transit stops like? And then what is the parking? How much parking is there? How is it being used? How heavily is it being used? And so some of our key findings were that there's quite long block patterns. That makes it a bit difficult to get around as a pedestrian, less so as a bicyclist. There's kind of a lack of amenities at the bus stop. You have quite a few bus stops, but there's a lack of amenities, so it detracts a bit from the user experience, makes it less comfortable to use that transit. There's a lot of parking, and then it rarely reaches capacity. And then there are limited pedestrian and bicycle connections. It can be hard to move between shopping centers, so you kind of have to get out, drive around in order to get to another shopping center. So there is an opportunity to really improve that. We looked at economics and market trends and what the kind of demographic and market conditions are within the corridor. For economics, we looked actually also at what the trends and market conditions were within a 15-minute drive radius around the project area, around the specific plan area. And that's really to make sure that we understood what was going on within the corridor, as well as what kind of outside market dynamics might be affecting the conditions and the characteristics within the corridor. So we looked at the demographics, we looked at the employment, and we looked at the housing market trends, and we put a little bit of that information here, but again, you'll be able to do a deeper dive at the station as well as dig into the report further. Just some key findings: that the shopping centers are aging. There's some rehabilitation that would improve it. There's aging population needs. So what kind of services, what kind of development, what kind of potentially residential or housing could be offered to better serve an aging population? There's quite a bit of vacancy for office, whether that's from COVID pandemic conditions or otherwise.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Do you have a picture of a 101, Highway 101 business when we're talking about the ECR court? Could you guys kind of mix it up, like forget where you were?
No, we're just recognizing that that's a condition within your city and that there might be elements of that that might apply or be brought to also exist along the corridor. So we just thought of it as a potential. Recognizing that that's a place within your city that we assumed that was positive. We found that there's some underutilized retail spaces, whether that be the existing structures, and then the parking lots also show kind of an underutilization and an opportunity. And then there's an opportunity within all of that, whether that be the underutilized spaces, buildings, or parking lots, that really could provide an opportunity for some startup and kind of high quality employment to be attracted in. Last but not least, we looked at utilities. This is just that kind of infrastructure that if we were to see development and growth within the corridor, we certainly need to have that infrastructure, whether it be the electricity, primarily the water, wastewater, as well as the electricity and gas, to go along with whatever development did come in and make sure that it came in commensurate with the development. So we just looked at the system capacities and availabilities and both existing and then whether there is future availability, future supply to meet potential demand.
Could you say where that is, that photo you just showed? That one?
This, I couldn't tell you actually.
Where is it?
I couldn't tell
By the
you.
trailer park?
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Yep. Just a couple initial findings. We found that a lot of the utilities are kind of visible, so there's a visual opportunity to kind of improve the aesthetics along the corridor by minimizing that. Some of it obstructs sidewalk or kind of pedestrian movement. And then we definitely recognize that there would be upgrades needed to those infrastructure pipelines, et cetera, in order to increase capacity and demand. So with that, I'm going to kind of close the opportunities and constraints portion. We're going to encourage you and invite you to move into the open house portion of tonight, which is really, one moment, I'll get there. Really where we want to spend the majority of our time. It is the opportunity for you to look at the additional detail beyond what I've shared here. And then we've got a lot of questions we want to ask you. We've got sticky notes at each of the stations where we really would encourage and ask you to provide us feedback to either what you want to see, what you like, what you don't like, and really help us finish out that the look at the opportunities and constraints within the corridor. As Jennifer mentioned, we've got one city staff member and then one consultant team staff member at each station. I assume that everyone's kind of interested to see everything. If I could ask you to kind of try and divide it somewhat evenly so that everyone has an opportunity for kind of one-on-one questions and comments, that would be really helpful. And then just last but not least, one of the stations at the very back is the vision statement or station. So I just really want to encourage and make sure that you stop by there and share your vision with us. So with that, I'll take a couple questions and then we'll break up. Yes, sir.
So back in 2013, a lot of these proposals and pictures and stuff were done and presented by other consultants.
Mm-hmm.